My name is Gretchen Downey, and my fellow speakers tonight are Caitlin Moore and Shabab Kamal. We'll be presenting on behalf of Team Blaze, or Bettering the Lives of Animals in Zoo Environments. We have 7 other members on our team, as well as our mentor, Dr. Kathy Thompson, and our librarian, Mr. Tim Hackman, who we'd like to thank for being here this evening. So we can move on to our next slide. This is just a background knowledge slide. So as a team, we're focused on limiting the amount of undue stress to which a captive animal might be subjected. So this stress can be a result of unrealistic enclosures or the forced proximity to other animals, which can include zoo visitors. So stress can manifest itself in abnormal behaviors, and our overarching goal is to provide an enrichment plan for captive felids that will encourage more natural behaviors. We'll measure the levels of stress using fecal corticoid analysis, which is a non-invasive tactic that allows us to see the trends or patterns in stress hormone levels. An enrichment schedule similar to the one instituted at the National Zoo will be applied to the Catoctin Wildlife Preserve and Zoo, which is a smaller privately owned zoo in Western Maryland. And enrichment, if you don't know, is simply the provisioning of combined animals with more things to do in their environment. So this slide here are our 2 research questions. Firstly, how does enrichment implementation vary among zoological institutions? And what is the impact of instituting a comprehensive enrichment schedule on endocrine measures of stress? So this brings us to our next point, which is the project justification, or why we're interested in environmental enrichment for captive felids. So the primary purposes of zoos, nationally and internationally, include education, conservation, and research. Education of the general public, conservation of all species involved in a zoo setting, especially those that are endangered, and research into a litany of things, including animal behavior, reproduction, sociality, and diet. Keeping in mind with this, captive animals are better representations of their wild counterparts when they exhibit more natural behaviors. So most importantly for our project, felids are particularly susceptible to illness and reduced fecundity, or the ability to reproduce when subjected to high levels of stress. So this continues our why, or our justification. So we chose to focus on a between-institution study because of the variability among zoos. Some zoos simply do not have the same resources that are available to larger, more perhaps well-funded zoos. Consequently, zoos such as the Catoctin Wildlife Preserve and Zoo may not be able to provide their felids with the most effective enrichment materials and methods. And without enrichment, stress levels will increase, leading to other health issues. So here are our predictions. We first expect to see an initial difference between the patterns of fecal corticoid analysis of the felids at CWP Zoo versus those at the National Zoo, simply due to a difference in enrichment schedules. And then, following implementation of the National Zoo's enrichment at the Catoctin Zoo, we expect the patterns of fecal corticoids to become comparable between the felids of the 2 zoos. So this is our methodology in flowchart form. We will first analyze the fecal corticoid data from the National Zoo that we collected over this past summer. With this data in hand, we will compare the hormone levels with a detailed enrichment log to determine which types of enrichment were responsible for which peaks and troughs in the patterns. We plan to survey zoos nationwide to gain an understanding of common enrichment practices and to see where our zoos land on the continuum of responses. During the summer of 2011, we will implement the National Zoo's enrichment schedule at the Catoctin Zoo, and then analyze the data from those 3 months for a comparison between the 2 zoos. This will lead to a comprehensive recommendation. Each of these areas will be explained in further detail later on in the presentation as I pass it over to Caitlin.
So the summer of 2010 marked the beginning of our data collection for this study. We had 3 lions and 2 tigers in our sample at the National Zoo. Their feces were collected daily by the keepers and frozen. The samples were put into baggies marked with the animal's name, their species, and along with the date that it was collected. To monitor the effect of the enrichment had on the fecal corticoid levels, we also were able to obtain the enrichment logs from the National Zoo. These logs give us the type of enrichment that was used on a daily basis by the keepers. It was also during the summer that we recognized our methodology had to be modified. Due to constraints of time and manpower at the National Zoo, we decided to expand our scope. One of our team members, the lovely Gretchen Downey, worked with a smaller zoo in Western Maryland where she recognized that what we had learned at the National Zoo could make an impact. This is what she had talked about at the Catoctin Wildlife Preserve, or CWP. Given that the National Zoo has one of the most sophisticated enrichment programs in the United States, we recognize that smaller zoos may not have the resources to implement a similar enrichment program. So we decided on a cross-institutional study of the National Zoo and Catoctin, where we will use fecal data from the National Zoo felids to determine an effective enrichment enrichment program for the Felids at Catoctin. Our team is currently in the process of analyzing our samples from this summer. First, we have to lyophilize the samples that were frozen. Lyophilizing is a means of freeze-drying the samples so that the hormones in the feces can be more easily extracted and analyzed. Our samples should be done freeze-drying by the end of this week so that they can be sent to the Smithsonian Biology Conservation Institute in Front Royal, Virginia for further analysis. We also are drafting a survey to establish what practices are in use with captive felids across the country. This will solidify and in some cases enhance the enrichment schedule we choose to implement at CWP. Okay. So we intend to send our survey out by December 18th of this year via a listserv that has been made available to us by the National Zoo. We hope to have the majority of the responses by the middle of January. This is a slow time of year for zoos, so we hope that the time frame will encourage them to complete the survey. The spring semester will be spent analyzing the raw data of the fecal samples from this past summer. Also, we intend to begin analysis of the results from our survey. These two facets will contribute to the final enrichment schedule we plan to implement at CWP. So to begin our experiment at Catoctin, we will collect a fecal baseline from the felids at CWP prior to our enrichment implementation. This will give us an indication of the felids' individual hormone cycles in a given day or week. This will allow us to recognize when there are differences that arise post-enrichment implementation. This baseline analysis will be followed by the actual implementation of the enrichment schedule that we design. Again, the fecal samples will need to be collected. Finally, these samples will be analyzed. We will look at the fecal corticoid hormone levels pre- and post-enrichment to see if there are differences that arise between the two, and that will establish the efficacy of individual enrichments and the program as a whole. Okay, so this is a timeline that depicts our future plans from here on out. So, as I mentioned, we are lyophilizing our samples now. And then, hopefully by the end of this week, we can have them analyzed at the Front Royal, Virginia facility, which has a cooperation with the Smithsonian, so that's how we got our in there. By December 18th, we plan to send out our surveys, and then we'll wait for the survey results to come back until March or so, where we can begin to finally analyze those surveys, and then compare that with the raw data from this summer, and then determine the specifics of our Catoctin experiment and enrichment. During the summer, we will implement our enrichment at Catoctin, and in the fall, we'll begin to analyze our fecal samples and begin our thesis. And then hopefully that will culminate with our thesis defense in March of 2012. And then beyond that, we also hope to publish our findings in a journal, so we would obviously begin to pare down our thesis then. Okay, so our goals by the end of the project, we hope to achieve the following. 75% participation in our survey will allow us to achieve an accurate snapshot of current enrichment practices in the United States. With this much data, we will be able to construct the best possible enrichment schedule for the felids at Catoctin. We also hope to recommend an easily implementable enrichment program for small zoos based on our findings at Catoctin. This ensures that all felids have an effective means of enrichment, no matter the size of the zoo. The enrichment will allow them to express more natural behavior, serve as better model organisms, and stay healthier. Finally, we hope to publish our findings in Zoological Journal with a pared-down version of our thesis. And I'll pass it off to Shabab now.
Hey guys, how are you? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced over the course of our project and how our team structure and infrastructure has evolved to sort of cope with those. The two biggest challenges that we've had have been, one, collaborating with the zoo, and the National Zoo, that is, and two, getting money for for analyzing our fecal samples. The second one is fairly self-explanatory. Money, 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 money. Anyway, it's fairly self-explanatory. Every team needs money. At $7 a sample, 5 animals over the course of a summer, it gets really expensive. Now, our second, the first problem is a little bit more complicated, but it's one that most teams are going to face in one form or another. The fact of the matter is, we are undergrads. And if you want to partner with any big organization, they probably don't have the time to deal with you. It takes a really long time to get in contact with any busy people, and the zoo is incredibly busy. It would take us several weeks at a time just to get a hold of one person, which would sometimes force us to adjust our schedule. Now we're going to move on and take a little bit of a look at our infrastructure and how that's grown to accommodate these problems. So first we have certain positions, just roles that we think individuals should be handling. We have 3 liaisons, one for the National Zoo, one for the Catoctin Zoo, and one for the Smithsonian Biology Conservation Institute in Frontenac. We decided that it would be better to have one person dealing with each institution so that they could form a more personal relationship with this institution and also get a better, deeper understanding of how these groups work. Now, we also have a financial liaison that keeps track of not only the money we get from Gemstone, but also all of our other funding, whether mostly from grants. Now, we have every team needs to have a team liaison every semester that keeps in touch with Gemstone, lets Gemstone know how we're doing, and lets us know what Gemstone wants from us. Our secretary is indispensable. She takes notes at all of our, she takes minutes at all of our meetings, and she basically reminds us of anything and everything that we need to remember that we can't collectively. Josh is our enforcer. It's a little bit of a silly name, but it's very apt. During all of our meetings, he keeps us on task. He makes sure that we're on topic and also following the team norms that we established when we formed as a team. And then finally, I'm the technology coordinator. I keep track of our email account. I make any doodles for all the scheduling we have to do. And our EndNote account or any other technology-based things that we may have to do. So in addition to these individual roles, we also have committees. You may have heard the phrase, lit review never ends. Well, it's true, we're talking to you sophomores. It never ends. And we have our lit review team constantly on the prowl, so to speak, for, that was terrible, for just any relevant articles that we may be, that might apply to our project. Sometimes it'll make us change our methodology, or sometimes it's just helping us fortify our background knowledge. Then we also have our grant team. They are always looking for grants, relevant grants, because like we said, money is a problem. It's not just a matter of applying, it's finding grants that your team is, or your group is likely to get. We also have our editing team. They go through any piece of writing we put out, whether it is a paper, a PowerPoint, a grant proposal. You'll often find that your editing team is just as important, if not more important, than your writing team. Then finally, survey group. They're writing, then administering, and then taking a look at the data after it's been collected. Advice for freshmen, and honestly advice for sophomores too. Maybe more so advice for sophomores. First thing, communicate with your collaborators early. Whether it is a lab you want to work at, a big institution you need to partner with, or even just an expert in the field that you need advice for, as I've said before, they are probably too busy to deal with you. The earlier you start working with them, the more time you have to get what you need. Don't become complacent. Your project may change, your project will change, honestly. Whether it's because you're in a different mood and you've decided you want a different methodology, or maybe just feasibility issues. You realize that you can't do what you planned to do from the beginning. Your project is going to change. That's not a bad thing. That's just the nature of any research. But it's important to be flexible and willing to integrate new variables into whatever you're doing. Start applying to grants early. Money is always an issue. The earlier you apply, the faster you can get your money. It's better to get money too soon than too late. Be persistent. It is so easy for an email to fall. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. Here's an email. Oh, that's important. Another email. Oh, and it just falls to the bottom of the inbox. It's a lot harder to ignore a missed call or a voicemail. And honestly, like I've said so many times, these people are busy. They are not going to be annoyed if you call them repeatedly. They're probably going to be thankful that you're reminding them of an obligation that they've already made. Lastly, you also want to enforce your team structure. All the other teams have shown, like, we all have different structures, different ways of following our norms, but it's important that you keep on top of it. It's really easy to become BFFs with each other, get really complacent, and then when a problem arises, you don't know how to deal with it because you just haven't been following the rules you set from the beginning. So it's really important to stick to your team structure. That makes it easy for everyone to know what they're supposed to do, and it just makes the whole project move smoothly. So right now, we're in the process of analyzing our fecal samples for their corticoid levels. We're creating the survey that we're hoping to distribute by the end of this year, as we said, and finalizing our methodology